All right. Welcome back, everyone. It's been a while. I think we're live. Had a little technical issues here with StreamYard, but yeah, welcome back, everyone. Onan here, and I've got Midnight Philosopher. How are you today, Midnight?
I'm doing fine, thanks, Onan. It's been a while, but we're kicking off 2026. I'm thinking those technical difficulties was just the devil doesn't like the good work you're doing, so he's interfering.
Yeah, I'm sure Ripperger would agree.
Mhm.
Yeah, made it through the holidays and stuff mostly. But yeah, I'm excited for the new year. We've been having some really good discussions over in our Discord community. Had a lot of new people join, especially women. I've been very happy about that. So glad to have them in our community and encourage more to join us.
Yeah, no, I think the diversity of perspective is really good. That's the difference, because like if this were Tim Gordon's Discord, like all the women would need permission from their husbands to join the conversation. But
Right.
we're like really progressive. We don't need to get a signed waiver from their husbands that they can speak with us.
I mean, if you want to do it, go ahead, but we're not going to require it, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I think we've had like some really good comments just about just the different experiences with NFP and really wrestling with the church's teaching, and also just the real heartache and anxiety that comes with like conscientious disobedience or legitimate objection. I think a lot of all the trad opponents are very quick to say everyone just wants to sin, but a lot of I think every one of us, it's like we're agonizing over stuff. It's not just like this pointless rebellion.
I don't remember where it was. I feel like it was Phaser, but it could have been someone else. Someone along that lines was making a point within the last month or so that you'll notice that everyone that, what do they say? Everyone that is leaving the church or objecting or whatever, basically says is always tied to some, what he calls, I think, sixth commandment violation or sin, right? Like they always say people that are struggling. Basically, his point was people that struggle with lust or sexual sins are the ones that leave. And I thought it was actually kind of a profound observation, because I thought there's actually some truth there, but for completely different reasons. Like, to me, that is the issue that keeps coming up. Almost every single person that comes in to sort of in my circle says, I'm either a convert, I've been a Catholic all my life, I love my faith, but there are just certain things about the sexual teaching that I just cannot reconcile with whatever, right? And it's always this category that is a hang up for people, and I think in many ways does sort of lead a number of people to leave, sadly. But that's the only thing that trads can focus on. Oh, they're for contraception, or they're for this or that or whatever, and that's what they reduce it to.
Yeah, no, the obsession is real. I think someone on the Discord had called it like the pink elephant problem. Like, the more you say that, don't think about the pink elephant, there's no pink elephant in the room, blah blah blah, and then before you know it, you're envisioning a pink elephant. I think that was in response because I had said that in my experience as a kid, I wasn't particularly like sexually curious. I mean, I had crushes, but it was really just, oh, well, she's pretty, or I seem to have like an emotional attachment to my friendship with this girl and stuff. I wasn't really, I just didn't have the knowledge or the curiosity about all the physical stuff, and I wouldn't have thought about it so much if they weren't, the church wasn't always sounding the alarm about sexual stuff. And then I just, it's like before I knew it, it's just like it becomes this ever-present anxiety.
Well, and for me at least, and I think this is especially true for a lot of converts, you sort of come in, you grow up, or you come into the church knowing, okay, no contraception, no sex before marriage, and then you think, okay, that's not easy, but I think I can, I think I can handle that. Well, then you find out there's much, much more to it. And I would say in many ways, all the other stuff that they don't really mention is the stuff that actually makes it really hard. or makes NFP hard or whatever. So it's just once you're in it, until you're in it, and you don't understand all of the different booby traps around you, you just you can't appreciate the level of difficulty, and I think the sincerity of people that do struggle with these things and are not just, like I said, looking for a path of life of gratuitous pleasure and all that. Maybe some do, but I think for the most of us, we're just trying to do our best, trying to love our spouse, raise our kids, and do it within the framework of a system that seems utterly impossible at times.
Yeah, I think like a lot of the women that have joined our Discord have really been talking about like what they perceive to be like the false marketing of NFP. That, of course, there's some difficulties but it's supposed to bear good fruit. But so many people are talking about how it's at conflict with legitimate health problems they're facing, or how just unreliable a certain method is, and how it could potentially drive spouses apart, and so they feel really misled by the sort of enthusiastic marketing behind NFP.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if that's intentional. I don't know. I don't necessarily know how to get the understand the disconnect between what they say and part of me thinks, do they just have such a different experience? Are they just magically, I don't know, more disciplined or less fertile or whatever? I mean, I honestly don't know how they could possibly get up and say these things if their experience is anywhere near kind of what mine is, and seemingly every other person that that seems to come into our circle.
My impression, and obviously this is just capturing like a small snapshot of the people out there, but some of them, a lot of the proponents are young unmarried people that are very idealistic, and they're just gung-ho about the letter of the law. Some of them are they had a life where it was it's kind of the prodigal son or prodigal daughter lifestyle, and they got a lot of that stuff out of their system, and now there's this sense of overcorrecting. It's like the St. Augustine syndrome. And I think for a lot of others, like I think a bunch of us, you might have been the one to bring it up, like for instance someone like Matt Fradd, and his wife I think had some severe health issues and ended up with a hysterectomy,
right?
And so right. There's a literal barrier and an impossibility to conceiving more children, and then maybe for others it's just like you said, they're not as fertile, or they're blessed with a lot of money that they don't face the struggles that your middle and working class families are facing. And so maybe surprise pregnancies are not so bad because they have money, they have really good health, and so they can't really empathize with people that money is tight, or there are some real physical limitations to how many pregnancies a couple could handle.
Yeah, I think all of those could be true, and I think mixed into that is probably, if we're being honest here, is one or both spouses secretly struggles with the same stuff that the rest of us do and just doesn't talk about that. I mean, it's hard to get people to be honest about this kind of stuff. I get it, but it just seems I've never seen one of these people, real people, like in the wild, like anyone that like I've talked to on a personal level. It's all the same, essentially all the same experience. And so I just can't imagine that there's some unicorns. Maybe they are. I mean, I don't know.
I think you are right that I think just because of the way that there's so many taboos even about talking or acknowledging about these things openly, and so much shame around these things, I think that's why we don't hear it, and we all have to keep up appearances so that we don't feel embarrassed in our community. But also I think there's that pressure, especially if you're a father, or you hold some kind of position in your community where you have to be a good role model, and so there's this pressure to sort of not show your weaknesses and to be a really model citizen and represent the faith well. Um, I think I had mentioned very briefly that I stumbled across like a comment from one of the homeschooling dads that I've known him for like 20 years, and he's always been a family friend, and I see him once in a while at church. And I guess he sort of just was. It was some kind of traditional Catholic Facebook group, and I guess he sort of, well, the context of the post suggested that what he was commenting about was his own struggles with these kinds of things, and how
Mhm.
a certain priest at our parish delivered him from these sins and stuff. And
Mm,
I'm pretty sure it was based on the context of the comment, even if he didn't use those words. I'm pretty sure it was like solo and
mhm.
internet content. And
Yep.
yeah, and he's a good guy, very traditional in his liturgical tastes, traditional in his theological and political preferences, and you know long time married, father of 7 kids, ex-seminarian. Um, and yeah, I would never have suspected that he was the type to struggle, but yeah, he sort of just was open about it on the Facebook comment, I think in an attempt to hopefully encourage others that are struggling with this thing.
So I was debating whether to talk about this, but it's a really good segue to it. So have you heard of Seek? Is it SEAK? It's a big Catholic.
Oh, is that like, yeah, I think it's
It's
sort of
going
like
on right
a
now.
conference. Yeah,
Yeah.
I've seen, I don't know much about it. I've just sort of
Mhm.
seen, posts or flyers or advertisements for it.
Yeah. I'm it's going on right now, and as I understand it, is there like 3 different locations around the country right now. So one of my kids is at Seek right now. I won't say which one, but um in it's one of my kids that grew up. We've raised all our kids Catholic school or whatever, and then this child, I would say, went through some issues and didn't want anything to do with the church for a while, and then has kind of come back with a vigor and was all excited to go out there. And we were very excited. We paid for them to go, but I see some of the speakers, and I want them to be excited. I want the faith to be exciting to them, but at the same time, I feel like there's a lot being left out, and specifically in the realm of chastity. So one particular person I was thinking of, I think we've talked about him before. I think his name's Lorenzo. He's got the To Become Family podcast. Him and his wife, beautiful couple, have a podcast that um, kind of deals with a lot of the same stuff, but I would say not in the context that we do, but kind of promoting, you know, Catholic values and NFP and church teaching and all that. But like almost everyone, he's a guy that had a history, had a past of addiction to these things, and and now he goes around speaking about his recovery from that. And I saw his Instagram post, and he was talking about how he achieved self mastery, and with the Lord's help and all that. And that was his um, talk to this group of college age young men and women. And on the one hand, I'm glad that is there. I'm glad he's there. But I just can't help but think, for the most part, most of these kids, or young adults are struggling with these things and will continue to struggle with these things in a very sincere way for the rest of their lives, right? And and so, in this whole topic of self mastery is something I really I wanted to talk to you a little bit about that, because I I think for Catholics especially, um, it's like it's never quite good enough. It's like the religion of not good enough. If you, no matter how good you are, there's something more you could be doing, or should be doing, or something bad that you're doing. And then on the one hand, I understand the need for us to be, humble and not rest on our laurels, but like sincerely, like there's just never you're never quite good enough. And when I see these folks, the um, some of the Timothy Gordon and the Mr. Pantyhose guy, I can't remember his name. You know, they talk about self-mastery, like any slip up at all. Well, you're or Christopher West to some degree, like to earn the title of sort of being a master of your own body, so to speak, you have to be like 100% heroic, like whatever. And I think to myself, like, look at us, like, I'm older than you, but there are lots of urges, even in the sexual realm, that I reject on if not a daily basis, a regular basis. Is there a temptation sometimes to go, like you said, peruse the internet for stuff? Sure, there's that natural instinct for that. If I was out of business and a very attractive woman started flirting with me, I don't really have a hard time saying no to that. But there's an instinct inside of you, be like, wow, that would be really great, right? But that's all part of self-mastery too, like saving yourself for marriage, which we did, using NFP at all, raising a bunch of kids, not using porn, not all this, and not even just sexual stuff, but the other stuff that you give up in your life to be a husband and father, or a wife and mother, your hobbies and your enjoyments of life, going to work. Like, there is just so many things that I think most of us do with varying degrees of success that require self-mastery and self-denial, that we don't ever get credit for or give each other credit for. You're reduced to the whatever infrequent or whatever or trivial, I'll use that term, issue that you struggle with. You're reduced to that. It's never good enough. If you're not perfect, you're not good enough. And I think that's a real problem for Catholics, because I think you can really fall into this. You can become very hopeless. You can feel helpless. You can get despair. And I think that I just see that something is sort of promoted, if you will, by the stuff that you hear about NFP, by these speakers, by these chastity speakers, by Christopher West and all that. And I'm just not sure it's a good thing. I'm not sure it's actually the best approach.
I fully agree with you. I'm going to draw an analogy with something that I never directly experienced because my parents were never particularly competitive, but I grew up in a neighborhood where academic competition at the middle school and high school levels was really intense. Like, in addition to just getting really high marks in all of your, your honors, mathematics and physics and chemistry classes, basically STEM education and engineering, all your standardized testing like the SATs, plus a bunch of extracurricular activities, or running for student council, all of that stuff. And just how it's like there's this sense of like you're never good enough, you're not high achieving enough, you're never going to make it into the Ivy League schools, and how that could be really just crushing on a child's development, on their social life. And it's really tragic. But actually, locally there were a string of like high school suicides, and I think that culture had something to do with that, just that sense of despair of you're never good enough. And I think in some way that there is a phenomenon with Catholic guilt, and it's like it's a similar type of feeling, but it's put in the context of this grand cosmic narrative about how you're never worthy enough, or you're not going to make it to heaven, or you're made to feel that you're falling short of what God wants you to be. And that's a really powerfully motivating thing, but I think taken to an extreme, it's also like a powerfully defeating thing. Because I think there's a certain amount, like anytime you hit the gym, or maybe you're learning a musical instrument or something, I think it's always good to think of like, appreciate where you are now, but think of what you could be on the other side of more practice or more workout. I think there's a healthy way to sort of envision what's on the other side of some sacrifice. But I think, like you said, where any slip up, where anything is just, it's just not good enough, or you're being lazy, you're being slothful, you're being lustful, it really is exhausting. and it feels defeating. And I think to tie it into something that Pick and Choose once said in the Discord a few days ago, um there's sometimes this sense of like we take our rejection of worldly goods to such an extreme where it's almost like the world itself is supposed, it's like all of this beauty of creation and all of our sensual experiences, not just in the area of sexuality, but good food, good music, just all of the sensory delights that we get in this earth. It's almost like this, you know, which just disregarded as a distraction from eternity, and we have to really just suppress all of our natural appetites or our appreciation for the goodness that we can offer, because any kind of attachment to this stuff is just, I don't know, spiritually hazardous.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly is, I think, something that a lot of Catholics, especially traditionalist minded Catholics, seem to fall into. And even if you talk about the ultra traditionalists, the Sedevacantists, the real old school, John Farrell types, like it's not even good enough that you're not using contraception or whatever. Like, you can't even use NFP. And not only can you not only use NFP, you have to be like only engaging for purposes of procreation. And then, and that I just find so bizarre. And so I asked the question, like, okay, it's clear that humans does not only desire, but enjoy and get actual clear benefit from sexual intimacy, even when procreation is either not possible or not desired. Like, that is, it is clear to me that there are benefits to it, good things that come from it. And of course it's enjoyable too, but even aside from the pleasure of the experience itself, it provides the whole unity thing, that trads have a hard time with, is a real thing. That connection, that, both the emotional, psychological, as well as hormonal benefits that come from that kind of intimacy. Why is that there? Did God do that to bait us? Like I would like someone to explain that. And someone will say, well, that's all effect of original sin, which I just find really darn skeptical that an effect of sin was to make this better, like to make good things happen to us. It's not like, abusing drugs or alcohol where bad things can happen to you. Like, literally nothing bad can happen to you within the context of a mutual, whatever, loving relationship. And so how can it possibly be that we're just supposed to have this stoic minded approach? And we, like, because God didn't have to make it enjoyable at all. God could have just said, when you sit down and you pray and decide you want to have a child, you have some sort of a strange handshake and you make it happen, and there doesn't have to be any enjoyment or desire, right?
Sure.
So how is it that literally the most powerful, moving, pleasurable, whatever you want to call it, thing that humans can do with each other, we're not supposed to actually use it that way? And in fact, if you use it that way, it might be sinful. Like, how the heck did we reach that conclusion at one point in time? And like it or not, I think that was the church's teaching. And those who say that church can't change will say, well, that's still the church teaching. But that was well accepted Catholic views on this thing for a long, long time. And how the heck do you square that with the idea of a loving God who truly did design us? I don't know how you reconcile those. I just don't.
Yeah, no, you're right. I think a lot of that paranoia about like you said, just that sort of resistance towards sexual pleasure and sexual desire, and with some extremists, like I know that there's that one extremist on Twitter that you frequently engage with. I think her name is like Akath or something like that.
Yeah.
And I think you and Jonah have made jokes about how her husband is probably quietly struggling because she's just gung ho about like no sex unless you want a kid, and then like indefinite abstinence or something. Like that. I to borrow a little bit from Jordan Peterson. Now, in the context of this little clip I saw a while ago, I think Jordan Peterson was talking about music, and what's so interesting about music is the interplay of like structure and chaos. About how if like music is built on patterns that we can recognize
Mhm.
and we can kind of hang on to, maybe a catchy rhythm or a melody that keeps coming back and we sing along with it. But then also, if it's always predictable, then music becomes boring and not stimulating. We need something that's a bit unexpected, whether it's some interesting lyrics or a change in the rhythm and stuff. And I think that very much reflects just human nature. I think there's something about the rational mind that we like to organize our lives in such a way that's predictable, and we can manage all the different stresses and all the different obstacles, and sort of lay things out in this structured, ordered way. But I think if everything is order, then we're sort of just a robot or a computer program, and we need some room for spontaneity. And I think it's that spontaneity that makes us particularly human and creative, and however we express ourselves artistically, musically, in terms of dance, in terms of innovation and technology, all of these like whimsical things that are not predictable. And I think in the area of romance and sex and marriage and all of that, I think human desire is that ingredient of like it's a little bit it's a little bit of I don't mean this in a negative way, but it is the spontaneous, unruly, hard to manage thing. It's like the impulsive, impetuous element of our nature, and I think there's just been this historical discomfort with it. And maybe part of it is just because when you don't discipline that, yeah, you end up in bad relationships that aren't healthy, or you end up violating your marital vows or something like that. So I think there is an element of chaos that can come from sexual desire that's poorly managed. But we've taken it to such extremes that we're afraid of any kind of spontaneity, of any kind of passion and whimsical elements of our human nature, and we sort of have to cage it in and suppress it. And it's only useful when we have kids. It has to be functional. It has to produce this result. And I think you and Jonah have talked about some, almost like sometimes it feels like the church tradition almost needs to trick us into having kids, because
Mhm.
if we're not always open to life, and we don't abide by a very strict sexual choreography, we'll just never have kids, and it'll just be pleasure, pleasure, pleasure. And as I've shared numerous times in the Discord and in private chats, I like real world evidence is to the contrary.
Yeah.
I just see a lot of people that are maybe Christians of various stripes that are not as hardliner, or people that just don't have any religious background, and they still either choose to have families, or they found themselves in a situation where they had a pregnancy sooner than expected, and they wind up just loving parenthood, and they're on this wonderful journey of cultivating a relationship with this new life that they have to nourish for the at least the first 16, 18 years until that child becomes an independent adult. And it's I think humans don't I feel like it's such a gross underestimation and maybe infantilization of Catholics to think that we need to be tricked into having kids. I think most people have a desire to, because at the heart of building a family is that human drive to want to create community. Starting with a little private community of you, your wife, and your children. And it's this huge solemn responsibility, and exciting, and full of struggle. This creation of community, and I do think that most healthy and happy human beings have that natural impulse, and we don't need to be sort of bamboozled into to having kids. Even the people that have enjoyed all of the what Catholics might consider forbidden fruit as far as sexual intercourse is concerned, like they've enjoyed all of the stuff that we might label as hedonism. They'll still get married and have kids.
Yeah, like, I think my wife and I, like, I mean, we were probably foolish to think we were only going to have like 4 or 5 kids, but
Mhm.
before we got married, that's sort of what we had in mind. And um, here we are, we have 9, mostly intentional, some of it just the byproducts of NFP being horrible. But um, I could very easily like I could make a lot of art. Like it's hard to explain how cool it is to be a father of 9. Like it is. There are parts of having a large family that are really really cool, and I'm sad that other people don't get to experience it. Maybe because they don't believe they can do it. People can do it, right? But it's hard for me to encourage people to do that when I've seen the price that it takes on a moral and spiritual level, trying to be a good Catholic, right? And that's the problem. But I think getting back to what you were saying, I think you hit it on the head, is that this part of human interaction is one of the most amazing, beautiful, creative things that you can do with some other person, but it can also be the cause of the most potent of pain, right? Heartache. Someone leaves you. I think of our friend John. I mean, I can't imagine that. What happened to his marriage, didn't have a profound impact, and I'm sure it did on his wife as well. And people that have been cheated on, or a spouse that or just life isn't what you expect it to be. So and even without that kind of tragedy, just in the regular, everyday, run of the mill thing of life, oftentimes we're just unsatisfied. Like it's true, you never really are quite satisfied. It's taken me really until, I would say, the last 6 months that I've reached a point where I'm relatively content. Never totally comfortable, but I've reached a point of contentment, if you will, in the struggles of our life. But for a long time, it was pure difficulty. And I think that the amount of pain that it can cause people, and how it is kind of insatiable, that I think a lot of philosophers in the past, Augustines or whatever, have just said, you can't manage this problem. You just need to you can't break this horse. You just need to stay off this horse. I think is kind of how they've approached it. And I in some sense, I can understand that. Like I've lived it. Like I've got a damn podcast because it is an acute source of pain in my life, or has been in the past, especially. But I don't think we need to take it to that extreme, because I think if we step back, I think if the church said, look, there is wisdom in saving yourself for marriage. There is wisdom in being faithful to one spouse for the rest of your life. There is wisdom in welcoming children. There is wisdom in self-sacrifice and, self-mastery in let's say a general sense. And I'd say there's even wisdom in the church's teaching on contraception, if that's kind of where we stopped. It's the problem is that's not where it stops, and it just gets kind of absurd after that. That's my feeling on it. And that's where I think, we as Catholics, I think we really have had an opportunity to be a beacon of hope for people that do struggle with these things. And I think we've kind of allowed our credibility to get lost in these absurd, efforts to return to the marital debt, or, can't even use NFP, or all these things. I just think we've destroyed our opportunity, our ability to really, I think, provide an actual meaningful alternative to the world that's hungry for something.
Yeah, especially that approach that you said about we should focus on the wisdom or the beauty of a certain teaching. But now it's sort of like you're avoiding all these booby traps,
Mm-hmm.
and it really does take away from the honest search for beauty and truth. Because now I think you've used the phrase survival mode, which I think is such an accurate description of that. And I think if you're sort of backed into a corner, I do think it's really spiritually destructive. And I hope that Pope Leo doesn't seem to have commented too much about matters of sexuality and marriage, but just my general sense of the tone of his papacy so far is he does seem very positive and soft spoken and compassionate. And I hope he does come around to commenting on these topics hopefully with more sympathy and with more openness. I mean, I'm hopeful. I mean, I think relative to the past popes, he's a bit younger, yeah. So we could hopefully, if all goes well, we can expect a long papacy. So I don't think he can avoid, you know, Humanae Vitae and TOB and all of the stuff that the rad trads argue in favor of. I at some point I imagine he's going to have to comment on it.
Yeah, I just think maybe. I mean, I suspect what he believes inside his heart or what he wants to say is different from what he feels like he can say as Pope. And I get that. I mean, I'm not here to be the Monday morning quarterback, but there is. I'm not optimistic that we're ever going to get anything meaningful from him or the next few popes. I just think it is going to come down to the whole issue of conscience. That's kind of one of the things that we were going to talk about. I want to raise one point. Someone in the comment said, says my spouse and I struggle with the contraception teaching in NFP. There's not another option for couples who have high risk pregnancies besides just don't have sex. And that is the problem is that idea that is actually a plausible option for people to just indefinitely go without any sexual intimacy, especially if all other acts are forbidden as well. I mean, can we just be realistic enough and acknowledge that that's not, number one, people are not going to be able to do that. And those that do, at what price? At what price are you reaching that level of mastery? Let me give you an example I was thinking about. And it kind of comes back to those that, the Christopher West and the pantyhose guy of the world that like to say that, well, just, lay down in the shape of a cross or use ice packs and all this and that. And eventually your body will discharge the pressure, if you will, when you sleep. But one of our boys, one of our boys when he was young was sick and had diarrhea or something like that. And it was I think it was uncomfortable for him to go. And I kid you not, that boy, I think he went a week without going. And he would sit there and he would cry. Tears would be running down his face. Would be like, just go. And he's like, no. And I'll be damned if he didn't hold that in until he couldn't, until eventually it came out against his will. And sometimes I feel the same way about those that say, well, nature has a solution to these things. Well, yes, but let's be real. That's not a solution, right? Like, it is not, even if there is no health effects from that, which I think there probably is, but even if there wasn't, like, at what cost, like what misery are you going to put yourself and your spouse through to avoid, to be that quote unquote perfect self-master? Like, I think that is the problem is at some point, the cost of being perfect is outweighed by the harm and damage you're doing to yourself and your spouse and your children and others trying to be perfect. And I think that is the problem is in a theoretical sense, is it possible for a couple to truly just live like brother and sister and share a house and all that and still be young and, relatively vibrant and have hormones? Is that possible? I suppose it is possible, but I would say it is nearly impossible and almost certainly impossible to do it without it causing other damage to the family that they don't account for. Like, I think that's the problem is when you have these absolute hard and fast, never cross this line thing, you can really, it starts to look absurd really fast when you're like, well, never under any circumstances whatsoever. Come on. Like, why would anyone take this seriously? I think that's a legitimate question.
I completely agree with you. I think that it is possible especially for people with lower libidos or maybe I don't know, something about the way they're wired and how they experience life.
Yeah.
It's just
Yeah.
more attainable for some.
Yeah.
And even for those people that maybe if it's particularly a struggle, but you know, to put it in rather dark terms, like maybe the motivation of fear and guilt is just that powerful that it'll overcome any natural bodily impulse you have. I think it's possible for those folks too. But at what cost though? And I think I do think that it goes back to that conversation about at what point are we willing to acknowledge that sexual relations with your spouse and sexual touch and then release and all of that, at what point are we willing to really acknowledge that it's a need?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
sure, it's not, maybe it's not quite the same type of need as like you need to sleep. Like at some point you're just going to pass out if
Yeah.
you're deficient in rest, or
Yeah.
or you know, maybe it's not the same type of need as food where you know your body is going to be, you're going to become emaciated and you're just deficient in nutrients. It's a little bit different. It's but I think there is a legitimate need to be fully alive and to feel connected at a deeply human level. And yeah, like as you said, as you alluded to, that the fact that your body will take care of business if you don't do anything implies that it's a function that needs to be, that needs to, you know, it needs to happen. And you know, some stories are even like, I know that like it's still being studied, but there are correlations of like, you know, the amount of time a man experiences ejaculation and, you know, the rate of prostate cancer. Now obviously that's a correlation, it's not a causation, but there seem to be studies that indicate that at some level, you know, keeping your parts functioning properly is part of just a healthy human life, and both in terms of your
Yeah.
relationship with your spouse and just how your body functions. I know that it's a crude way of putting it, but I think there is some measure to the, if you don't um, you know, if you don't use it, you lose it.
Mhm.
And even though, you know, as a Catholic show, we're not going to advocate solo, but I'm still constantly surprised how many secular scientific sort of studies or sort of kind of, you know, tips or top 5 whatever for your sexual health or your bodily health, how solo is kind of accepted as just, it's kind of like almost like a routine to just keep, it's like a maintenance routine, so to speak. It doesn't necessarily have to be paired with, you know, illicit materials on the web or lustful thoughts, but it's almost like, yeah, you know, it's almost like blowing your nose or using the bathroom. It doesn't have the weight and the taboo that we're accustomed to in a Catholic setting.
Yeah. And you know, I echo that. And I think for me, I'm absolutely convinced that there is a biological and an emotional need for sexual intimacy or activity of some sort. And I think more so for men. I think biologically men, I mean, just the way our bodies work and fluids and all that kind of stuff. I mean, I do believe is that there is actually a biological need for that to be regularly activated. Now, what regularly is might be relative to different people, but I firmly believe that to be true. And I also firmly believe that married couples need sexual intimacy regularly. Now, that may not be the marital act, okay? But it needs to be more than just, you know, because like what do the Christopher West of the world always say? Oh, there's other ways that you can be intimate when you're abstaining. Well, okay, but let's be real. Holding hands isn't going to happen. Isn't going to cut it. It needs to be more intense than that. But the problem is, and this is the problem that we do to ourselves as Catholics, is you kind of force couples to cut off normal intimacy, normal affection during the abstinence period, because God forbid it put one or, you know, both of those spouses on a trajectory where they need to relieve that tension prior to nature doing it, right? And so it creates an environment where if you're going to try to do all these things, you almost by definition have to be completely asexual, relational with each other, lest you fall into other sins, so to speak. And then so what ends up happening is once the marital act is the excuse me, the only way that couples are allowed to fulfill one or more of these different needs, I think they are needs, it really in many ways cheapens the act, and it kind of, I just think it takes away some of the specialness of it, because for a lot of guys, myself included, for when if you've been abstaining for 2 weeks because of NFP, there's a huge biological desire just to do that because of what it does for you, right? Rather than, let's say, being primarily motivated because I want to share that intimate experience with my wife. So as Catholics, because of these rules, in a weird sort of way, I think we undermine the value of the full marital act, because we don't give people other options to satisfy some of these needs. And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm wrong, but I'm just saying it the way that I see it. I do not actually believe that these things are not needs. And is the question, do people need sex? Do men need sex? I don't know if men need sex, but I do think men need sexual activity. I do think most men need sexual intimacy. And I think wives need that, even if it isn't, even if it's in the context of something other than the full marital act, for whatever reason, we need that. And not only do we need it, like we were talking about, not only is the price paid, like what you're putting yourself through trying to not do those things, but you're also depriving yourself in the marriage of all the benefits and fruits that come from those things, even separated from the marital act or from the marital act itself. When let's say you could approach that if you had, if you could licitly use contraception or something like that. So you are in fact depriving yourself in your marriage of these benefits, these clear, I think, indisputable benefits, as well as this suffering that you're causing to yourself in an effort to comply with these rules. That ultimately is what most couples eventually face at some point in their marriage, and there doesn't seem to be, I don't think, a real good response to those people other than to suck it up and deal with it, embrace your cross.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And it is like I think that's why this. I think one of the things you said at the beginning of the stream was that it might have been Phaser or somebody else, that everybody who objects to Catholicism or leaves the church has some problems with the sixth and ninth commandments. But I think I think there's a very legitimate reason for that, is because that's one of our most concrete and lived and embodied experiences, right? So, and it's because of the disproportionate emphasis on these things that they make it a trigger. If it were just one, one of the smaller things along a lot of other things that you have to do in pursuing the life of virtue, then maybe we'd have other hangups. But it's because they place so much weight on it, and when we're told that we should know them by their fruits, and it's causing real damage to actual marriages and actual parenting situations. And I think that's why it becomes, because then it's like, if this is wrong, what else is wrong? And also I think one of the things that came up in the chat about guilt and the sense of like never being good enough, and then it does lead to a kind of despair. And I think a lot of it does have to do with the disproportionate emphasis that I think we've all noticed it online with trads. I've repeatedly said in the Discord that there's a particular priest or two that I've come across, and it's like every homily, even if the readings, the gospel or the Old Testament readings, don't have anything to do with marriage, somehow everything winds up being connected to sexual sin. And then it becomes this weird neurotic fixation.
Yeah. And I don't know what to do about it. I mean, I don't know if it's always been this way, or if this is just a product of the times that we live in, and the way that we can interact so freely and rapidly with people, or if or like I said, maybe people just struggle with these things more quietly in the past. And I know, talking to Father Carr and stuff, this seems to be an especially Western European, American phenomenon. It doesn't seem to be anywhere near the type of obsession it is in, let's say, the Latin American countries and maybe Asia. I don't know enough about those areas to be able to comment, but it is, it is a very uniquely American and Western European problem or issue. If you don't want to call it a problem, an issue, I think.
I think, not to, I know that Protestants already get enough hate from Catholic influencers, but maybe there is that kind of Protestant Puritanism. I always hear about purity culture, particularly in the context of like American evangelicalism, and maybe that did bleed into American Catholicism. I mean, credit where credit is due. We do have to also credit, like, Augustine and Aquinas and Ligori. So within our own tradition, that's certainly the case. But in an American context, I know that stereotypes about purity culture are most especially prevalent with the evangelical Protestant church. So yeah, I think there is something to that observation, that it's, maybe if we experienced Catholicism somewhere else, maybe we took an extended pilgrimage or retreat in some other part of the world, we would have a different different experience of it.
Yeah, I would think so. And I often wonder, if the Pope and the bishops and the priests that hear confessions, which storyline are they hearing? I think a lot of the people that are kind of, say, in the trenches, the normal average people, and I don't think the priests hear that stuff. I mean, I think Father Carr's made it clear, like he's learned a lot about these issues through his involvement in our, community, and maybe they have no idea, because like I said, if the people that get up and talk at these Catholic conferences are these guys and women that, have this sordid past, and now I'm fully recovered and I'm self-master. Well, I guess, okay. Yeah. If it's possible for them, it must be possible for everyone. And maybe it is. I don't know. I for a long, long time, I thought that it was possible and the problem was just me. But I don't know. I've been doing life long enough, and I've done enough hard things that most people can't or won't do, that I don't think it's a matter of effort. I think it's something far beyond that, or it is something where I feel like I appreciate that the cost of compliance is just so disproportional to the benefit that I just, how in good conscience can I do that to my family? Like, I think that's where people run into the question of, like, what do we do? Can we follow our conscience? Can we disregard one of these kind of foundational aspects of, Catholic teaching or whatever? Can we do that? And I think the answer is yes. I think the answer is conscience. But, I think every one of us that kind of finds ourselves wrestling with that never really feels comfortable or satisfied, because you're like, well, you got to have a well-formed conscience. And how can you have a well-formed conscience if you disagree on something that's, black and white, like, right? I think that's where a lot of people struggle with. And I just think that's where if the Pope could weigh in on that and provide couples with some, I don't know, confidence or reassurance, without, completely pissing off the trads. And maybe that's not possible. I don't know, but I don't know how to thread that needle, but that seems like it needs to be done.
I think that ties into another really useful and important thing that's been coming up in the Discord about that tension between conscience and the notion of a well-formed conscience, and then being at odds with the church, and we do have this tradition of or at least more recently it seems to be explicit, like the primacy of conscience. And I
Mhm.
know Bishop Barron, quoting John Henry Newman, who I think was just recently declared a doctor of the church, if I'm
Mhm.
correct,
Mhm.
about how the conscience is the aboriginal vicar of Christ, or really where each of us has some kind of direct contact with God, um, and how God moves the human heart through the conscience. And I do think that there has to be something to that, because if 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 we really are supposed to do the Father Ripperger model, right, and just and it's all about the complete and total submission of intellect and will to the
Mhm.
church.
Mhm.
um like, what's the point of thinking independently if we're not even supposed to question? We should just,
Yeah.
if we could take something that, some kind of numbing agent that reduces our intellectual and emotional impulses, and then we could just function in a way that we just take commands. I think I think the whole function of conscience is there should be a healthy amount of tension between what we're told to do and what sort of the experiences and the data that we get from our experiences tells us, because I don't really see any practical use of conscience if we're just all supposed to agree, and any ounce of disagreement we're just supposed to suppress and never entertain any questions. Then in some sense, like, the conscience is entirely useless.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I know some will say, well, you can only use it on the gray area, and I don't know. I don't see a lot of gray area left for debate. Like
Mhm.
that is one of the things. The I think the benefits and the challenges of being Catholic is there is very little left to discretion on a lot of things, and I sometimes wonder if we haven't been too um let's say too prone to like coming down and putting down that that stake in the ground. This is intrinsic, this is absolute, there's no wiggle room whatsoever. um if nothing else, we had been more restrained along the way, but it just seems like everything just goes from 0 to 60, every issue. Okay, this issue solved, therefore boom, you must agree with us. And if you, not only if you do these things are you wrong, but even if you disagree with us and say this isn't, no, that's such a good idea, let him be anathema, right? Like that, that's the language you see. And I think the problem is I think there's two prongs to this. One is compliance. Like I think it's one thing to force people into compliance on an activity level. So that, I think this is where a lot of Catholics struggle. They're like, okay, fine, I'll do the NFP, I'll do this, because I'm scared to be wrong if I do otherwise. But that's, so you can control the activity, but the intellect doesn't work that way. I mean, you you can't make someone believe something they don't believe, right? Like I think that's the problem that too many Catholics miss is you can shape your activity. You can do stuff that you don't want to do, or don't, whatever. You can tell someone to march into battle and know they're going to get killed, right? It makes no sense, but on an intellectual level, you can't make the mind believe something it doesn't believe, or and that's the problem. Is I think for a lot of people, they find themselves, well, what am I supposed to do with that? Am I to lie? Am I to say, yeah, I believe that, when in fact I don't? And what do I do with that tension? And I think and this is where I think the conscience comes in, because the conscience, I think, is sort of the refuge of the intellect, in that it preserves the right, not only the right, but the obligation you have to protect your intellect, and only force it to, the intellect is the product of what it sees and hears, right? You can't just say 2 + 2 = 5. If 2 + 2 = 4, or there's some other equation there. And for too many people, they can't make that leap. And maybe with time, maybe with with another Christopher West podcast or something. Maybe it'll all click for them, but I think for a lot of us it doesn't, right? And what do you do about that? And I think that is where I think people really struggle, especially when your mind isn't like, you're not behind it in your mind. You don't see the sense of this, and then you also see the harm that the foreseeable harm that you are doing to yourself and your family to do these things that you just, in your mind, like, this doesn't make sense. Like, that is the scenario that most people are dealing with, and it's not this caricature that the Phasers and others of the world that people are just slaves to their carnal desires. It's just not really what's going on.
Yeah, I think that point you made about we can't control what we believe is such a powerful thing that doesn't really get appreciated enough. Like, let's maybe apply it to a different topic. Like, maybe there are certain things about, like, I don't know, let's just say Marian devotion, which is such a huge part of Catholic tradition. And for instance, that's one of the cliche sort of sticking points with Protestants. That's such a big hurdle. And even there are some, like, for instance, like, one of the trad YouTubers that I think, in my opinion, one of the most respectable one, Brian Holdsworth. I don't think he talks too much about Marian devotion. I think he respects it, but the rosary doesn't seem to be such a huge part of his his content and stuff. But then you have others like maybe Cameron Reeker, who just, like, everything is like a mark rosary, right? And I think that they're like these, with all the supernatural stuff. Even if maybe our default setting as Catholics is we maintain a certain openness to the wealth of tradition that we have, but it's, you can't really force yourself to just feel like, oh, I'm going to be devoted to this saint or devoted to the Blessed Mother in a special way. And it's sort of like some people, maybe due to temperament, or just there's something about the story and the teachings of the Blessed Mother or a particular saint, you're drawn to that figure in Catholic history, and you sort of find yourself in a special relationship. But in some cases, like, I think maybe people just go along with it because it's just it's everybody's doing it, so you're going to grow up praying the rosary or being devoted to that saint. But maybe internally it's not necessarily something that's meaningful to you, and you can't really make sense of it in a practical way. Like, even for myself, like, maybe to make it more personal, like, I definitely pray the rosary with my mom, especially, and with a lot of my family that's just been a part of growing up, and even now, like, when I don't know, I've been trying to take more walks and stay in shape, and every now and then I'll just pray the rosary. I don't necessarily think temperamentally I've always felt drawn to it naturally. I'm not entirely sure if it bears good fruit, but maybe my interior disposition to it is it is a kind of openness to maybe there is something good out of it. And but it's also like, maybe it's a pretty low cost thing. Like, maybe it takes 15 minutes. I say the prayers that I've known since my childhood, and I'm sort of like, maybe there's this hope that it'll bear fruit, and I'm trying to meditate on these different scenes from the gospel. But you take that same thing about, like, NFP, where the cost is so much more huge, and it's not just 15 minutes of prayer, and the stakes are so concrete. Like, if it goes your way or it doesn't go your way, like, the cost is rather huge, and you can't really change your inner disposition about it so easily, because I think when it comes to more concrete things, our inner sense of belief and faith is motivated by the perception of good on the other side. But when there are so many indications that it doesn't lead to more good, it leads to marital strife and suffering and all of these things and anxiety, it's very difficult to convince yourself to believe in the good of something if, it's not quite as ambiguous as, like, the rosary. Maybe there is good out of it, and maybe we just have to believe and trust that there will be some good fruit. But there isn't really a high cost. But it's very difficult with something so concrete, where all of the indications are saying, might not necessarily fit your situation. In fact, it might aggravate certain stressors in your marriage.
And I think that's true. And I think not only can people have different temperaments, if you will, but I think just seasons of life, right? I mean, I think, when I was a younger guy, I prayed the rosary. The rosary was very, and I still pray the rosary daily, but it's more of a habit than something I would say look forward to or get benefit out of, and like on the Marian devotion thing, it's sort of like you said, the rosary is sort of a low cost. Like maybe you don't get any, maybe some people, I'd say a lot of people probably don't get much out of it, but you don't really give up much to do it, right? But what if we said, no, you must make a pilgrimage to Fatima, right? I could make a pilgrimage to Fatima, and theoretically, I could take all of my kids to Fatima. I'd probably have to sell my house and could could I put all the chips on the table and take the family to Fatima? Probably, yeah. And if I knew we needed to do that, like if it was absolutely essential to our salvation, of course I'd do that. But I don't think it is, right? And so I'm not going to do that. And so I think it's really important to calibrate things to, because when you start talking about these things, people are like, well, there's all kinds of things in life that you have to say no to. Well, no. Like you said, the stakes are just too high when it comes to, matters of sexuality and procreation and, whether it's a high risk or just a normal pregnancy or whatever. It's like I said, asking someone to pray the rosary is not the same as asking them to go to Fatima. And I think that's the problem that a lot of people don't understand, or maybe people that have all the money in the world to go to Fatima, they're like, well, why not? Well, maybe not everyone can do that or should do that, and it may be, in fact, be very imprudent to do that. And that's, I think, it's so easy for people to get to see reality through their own experiences, that I think is probably a cause of a lot of the confusion here. And I think of myself too, like the circumstances in life that led me, 3 years ago to start podcasting with Jonah. My situation is very different now. It's not easy, but like I said, there's a level of contentment to the extent that I don't know that, like, if I just starting today, if I would have started a podcast or done these things, because the pain level isn't there now that it once was, but it sure was. And I still remember it. It was really terrible for a long, long time. And I know there are people in that situation, but I can already start to feel, just having not been in that crucible all the time now, that I've almost lost a little bit of the feel for it. And I sometimes wonder, these Catholic commentators, maybe, like I said, maybe they've had a hysterectomy and they don't have to deal with these anymore. It can be very easy to forget what you went through and what other people are going through.
Yeah, no, you're right. I think another thing about your approach to these issues and starting the podcast, and even now that you're hopefully, knock on wood, you're past the worst season of your life and your marriage.
Mhm.
But I think one of the biggest measures, I think, of what our conscience dictates is when we're thinking more than just ourselves and just our personal advantage. Because I think, based on what I know about you and Jonah, is that you're also thinking about what other people are doing. So these questions are not motivated by, Onan and Onan's marriage and Onan's family and Onan's desires. There's also a degree of empathy for other people. And I think one of the biggest questions in any topic, right now we're talking about sex and marriage, but really across any topic, is if you truly believe something like a teaching or a concept or something like that, if you really believe in it, you should really be able to look at it, just about anybody, straight in the face and actively promote it, and really kind of make a case for why it's good and beneficial, even despite some difficulties that'll naturally come. But I think the fact that we can't, you, me, and all of us in our community, that it's really tough to really, with a straight face, just like adamantly insist that this is the best path. I think that there is something to be said for why we can't. Like, I think there are many, many other aspects about the church that we could make a very bold and confident and good-natured charitable case for. But I think when we put, not only when we realize our own struggles and pain with these things, but also see the pain that others are, this sort of quest is not just for a small bunch of people, but it's for a lot of people, and not only in the Discord community, but I think there are a lot of people that are, for various reasons, they're not able to say these things out loud, or they
Mhm.
haven't found a community to sort of work these
Yeah.
things out with.
Yep. No, I mean, I feel very blessed to be, in this unique position that I'm in. And, I feel and I do for sure feel that a lot of the blessings and growth that's happened in my marriage and my spiritual life is because I've had a place to talk about these things and talk to other people and get affirmation from others that I'm not the only one. But you're right. I don't want anyone to go through what I went through if it can be avoided, right? And that's where, like, um there was that post over on Reddit recently where a couple, they had been kind of reverts, or she was going to convert, and he had a vasectomy 4 years earlier, and a priest was and now that they come around, they feel guilty about it, which I get it. Okay. But seriously thinking, and she has like severely dangerous pregnancies. Like she said, we cannot get pregnant again. And they're seriously thinking about reversing that thing, which I'm pretty certain they're not required to do. Like, I don't even think I'm like venturing into dangerous waters, but it's saying you don't have to. And I'm like, I can't think of worse advice you would give that couple to tell them to reverse that and then venture into the waters of NFP, especially given her circumstances. And so seeing that, and I'm like, no, like, these people are telling me I gotta get it. I'm like, no, don't. What are you doing to yourself? Like, I firmly believe that if they do what this priest or others are telling them, they are going to be damaging their marriage, and I can't let that happen. I can't let that happen without a fight, without an effort to help people, because, man, I just can't imagine.
Yeah. Kind of to play devil's advocate and to sort of like maybe look at the flip side. I wonder if the hardliners have the opposite reaction, where it's like they're like, hey, you know what? I suffered through it, so you can do it too. Stop being such a wuss. It's like antipathy instead of empathy.
Yeah, no, I mean, there is what is the one gospel passage where the laborers in the vineyard and the guy that was the ones that showed up at the 11th hour got paid the same as those over the whole day, and that is, I do see that in Catholicism, and I do wonder if there isn't, even implicitly, maybe they're not even aware of it, but I do think there is this thing like, holy crap, I went through all this. There's no way that these people should get off any easier than me. And I'm the exact opposite. Like, I don't want my kids to go through what I went through. I don't want my worst enemy to go through what we did and what we've done and what I know a lot of couples go through. And we don't have it as bad as most people. Like, we never have been in a situation where my wife's life was, let's say, at risk. We've never had miscarriages and stuff like that. And, so I'm not even talking from a position of what some people actually do go through. For us, it's our cross has been just being super fertile, and just the regular sacrifice and that goes into caring for a large family for a long time. So I can never not relate to that idea that I somehow you'd want other people to suffer, that you would be unsympathetic to other people's situation, knowing what you've gone through.
I'm completely in the same boat. I think I've I won't go into the personal details, but I've told you and a few others in the Discord that, like, I think I'm in a phase of life where I am seriously, like, I have some things to figure out, but I do like, I really am discerning parenthood, and I'd love the chance to welcome at least a couple kids one day. And I don't think my wife's quite there yet, but I hope that I hope and pray that she'll be open to that sometime soon. And it's like, I'm not thinking of these teachings because I just never want to have kids, and I never, I'm not contradicting these these things because I never want to have kids and just want to have a hedonistic life. But it
Mhm.
is like, it is sort of like, can you at least have some control where you can pick and choose the most meaningful suffering rather than just take it all, and then you're just fighting for your life in survival mode? But
Yeah.
can you sort of pace yourself accordingly where you willingly take up, the necessary suffering to accomplish the good that you really do see in family life? And then also just the practical thing of like, if I am blessed to be a father one day, I honestly don't think I could, pass these things on exactly as I was taught to my kids. And
Mhm.
I think I would probably risk contradicting the church's teaching in order to sort of give my kids a more honest assessment of all of the struggles. I struggle to I don't know that I could just toe the party line blindly. I kind of feel like I would shortchange my kids of like, certain tools to navigate these challenges. So yeah, I do think that part of, like, ironically, it's like I'm not just thinking of these things because I want to live a carefree, hedonistic, child-free life. It's also the sense of like, how do I make a case for the faith and make a case for the Catholic tradition for the next generation, in a way that I can really sincerely, with a straight face, you know, communicate this and pass this on. And it is in thinking about the role as parent and the role as teacher, of how these things make sense. And I can't just be dishonest and toe the party line, even if I'm kind of crossing my fingers behind my back because I don't entirely buy it, but I have to toe the party line.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you have some time to think about that. I mean, I'm kind of at that juncture of life. I see Albert's in the comments. He and I are um, sort of contemporaries a little bit. I think he's a little older. I think he has another kid, and maybe has grandkids. I'm not sure about that, but I'd be curious what you're doing in terms of with your kids, because right now I'm not in a position where my kids are necessarily getting married um, soon, and I don't know what to. I mean, we've I think done a decent job of telling them the big things. Save it for marriage, no contraception. But like you said, I if they said, Dad, I want you to swear under oath, tell me what you really think about this. I don't know what I don't know what I would do. I mean, because I don't know. I just I want to believe, and I want to tell them, but because obviously I want them to be. I mean, I am Catholic. I want them to be Catholic. I want them to be faithful. I want them to get to heaven. But it's really hard to not be like, oh, but there's more you should know. I don't know. I have not personally crossed that bridge yet, but it's getting close. I mean, it's something and it could be any day now. And I know at least one of my kids listens to the podcast from time to time, and so they're getting exposed to it. But it is not easy. It is not easy to talk about, and I don't know what the right answer is. I'd be curious what other people do or have done. I didn't really get any kind of talk from my dad, and I just kind of had to learn it on my own and whatever. And I think that's unfortunately what a lot of us end up doing. We just don't talk about it. And that's a shame. Like nothing, like of all the skills I could pass on to my kids, is there really anything more important than this? Probably not. Even Albert was talking about how difficult it is to talk to your spouse. Like it is still difficult for me and my wife to talk about these things, especially on the parts that are difficult for me that are not difficult for her. Or we have different kinds of difficulties. Even after 20 some years of marriage, and having you have 9 kids, and you go to 9 births, you see a lot. Like there isn't much left of the imagination, but even then it is hard to talk to your spouse about these things. And then, I think it's even more difficult to talk to your kids, especially when you can't be like, oh, rah, rah, this is all great. Go read Theology of the Body and it's going to all be great. Great. What do you do when you can't do that? I don't know.
Yeah, it's really tough. Um I mean, like you said, I'm blessed to have, like, I still have time to think about it, but I think especially because you said of your history of being a trad, so maybe it's like if you raised your kids, especially your older kids, if they were raised a certain way with a certain paradigm, to sort of shift the paradigm kind of as they're older now might be kind of abrupt for them. And maybe that's also just something you yourself are negotiating, just the journey from being more of a trad to someone who really wrestles with these questions open and
Well,
honestly.
and and even my wife doesn't struggle with these things. Like, I mean, her struggles are not my struggles. Her struggles are, I don't want to get pregnant again, and NFP has not always been reliable. But all this moral stuff, she doesn't like. It's not her struggle, and I know that, and she's certainly reasonably aware of the struggles that we have, but I don't think she truly can understand what it's like, and so I think my wife would not have much of a heart, would not have much difficulty telling our kids, oh yeah, follow Theology of the Body, follow Humanae Vitae, this is what you got to do, because even her experience is so different than mine, and what she might tell our kids is probably different than I would tell our kids.
Yeah, no, I guess that's right too. Just even within the same marriage, you can have completely different perspectives. I do remember that from her appearance on the podcast maybe a couple months ago that, um, yeah, clearly she didn't seem to be afflicted with the same types of pains and
Mhm.
struggles. So, good for her. I guess she doesn't need to start a podcast, at
No.
least not yet.
No, and maybe it's good that this is my cross alone. I don't know, but it is still lonely. It is still lonely to carry the cross and to struggle with these things and share it with your life partner, your spouse that just will never understand the big deal, right? And I think that's probably not that uncommon. Now you know, uh, we have a lot of women that join our group that I think it is much more of a struggle for them, and you know, I think their husbands are especially beneficiaries of the fact that this is difficult for the wives, beyond simply the fear of getting pregnant and all that, but the abstinence as is in fact difficult for them. Um, so I don't know. Um, I'd love to have a conversation with Albert sometime about this, because I don't really know. I don't know what I would say or what the right answer is. Maybe we can sit down sometime and chat, because I think this is an important topic. Like, I think, you know, eventually, if you do have kids, they are gonna, they. I think you want them to look to you. I think you want your kids to get your perspective on this, at least in addition to anything else they might hear. But boy, is it hard to share that with them when everything is yes but, or there's a disclaimer involved. I think that's a real challenge, and that's true in general. I mean, I think, again, kind of coming full circle, is one of the challenges of being Catholic is I for people that are blissfully unaware of all this stuff, I'm like, do you really want to subject yourself to this? I don't know. It's harder and harder. Like I said, a couple of people in the comments, including yourself, your spouses aren't Catholic. Boy, um, it's kind of like we'll wrap up here in a couple of minutes, but the meme that goes around where, like, the Eskimo guy someone tells him about Jesus and says, "Wait, you mean if I hadn't known about Jesus, I'd be safe?" Yeah, then why did you tell me, right? And so
Yeah.
there is that ignorance is bliss to some extent. That I don't know. I don't have answers to all those things. These are things that I think about a lot, though.
And I think I'm glad that you've created a space for a bunch of us to
Yeah,
think out loud, because
yeah,
it's,
yeah.
I think thinking out loud with a group certainly lessens the pain, even if it doesn't entirely remove it.
Yep. No, I mean, I think this has been so much needed, and it's been a great privilege to be part of it and to continue to be a part of it. And I just, you know, everyone has different missions or whatever. And maybe God does have some special plan for the Timothy Gordons of the world or whatever. I don't really need to go piss in anyone else's boots, but there is just no other space like the one we've created. I don't think that, but it's so, man, it is so needed. And so we'll keep doing it. I do have to get wrapped up. I'm going to try and get to the gym and get this all this Christmas weight dealt with, and then go home with the family. So any parting words before we wrap it up?
No, I'm glad to start 2026 off right
Yeah.
with a live stream with you, and I hope
Yeah.
we do more. And it certainly has helped me a lot. So I'm thanks for all you do, Onan, and thanks to everybody in the chat too. Like all the new members have been really cool. I hope that maybe some of our new lady members might join you for a chat. I think their perspective is really much needed. So maybe if one of them, if you guys could work it out with your schedules and you do a live stream discussion, I think that would be really great to have some of our lady commenters.
Yep. No, I think that is definitely especially needed. So thanks for everyone who showed up in the comments, and for anyone that shows up after the fact, leave us a comment, and we'll try to be a little more regular with this, because I think it is an important thing that we're doing here. So all right, well, thank you, Midnight. Thank you as always. It was a pleasure talking, and we'll catch you everyone next time.